Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Stories That Touch the Heart. I'm your host, and today we have something truly special for you. Have you ever found something unexpected that changed everything? Maybe an old photo, a forgotten note, or a mysterious object that made you wonder about its story. Today's tale is about discovery, love, and the courage to chase the unknown. It's about how sometimes the most beautiful journeys begin with the smallest steps. So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let me tell you about Margaret and her amazing adventure. This is the last letter from Paris. Margaret was 72 years old when she found the letter. She had bought the old book 20 years ago at a small shop downtown. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when she opened the book again. The pages were yellow and smelled like old paper and forgotten dreams. As she turned page 43, something thin and white fell onto her lap. It was a letter, carefully folded and slightly torn at the edges. Her hand shook as she opened it slowly. The handwriting was beautiful, written in dark blue ink that had faded with time. "My dearest Marie," it began. "I write this knowing I may never see you again. But love finds a way, even across oceans and years." Margaret's heart beat faster as she read each word. This was a real love letter written by someone who truly cared about another person. The letter was signed, "Forever yours, Henri," and dated June 15th, 1952. At the bottom there was an address in Paris, France. She read the letter 3 times that day. Each time she felt something stirring inside her chest, something she hadn't felt in years. Margaret had lived a quiet life since her husband died 10 years ago. She worked in her garden, read books, and visited her daughter on weekends. But this letter made her think about adventure and love. She wondered what happened to Henri and Marie and why the letter was never sent. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the beautiful words Henri had written and the love that seemed to jump off the page. The next morning, Margaret made a decision that surprised even herself. She would go to Paris and try to find Henri or Marie. Her daughter Sarah thought she was crazy. "Mom, that was 70 years ago. Those people are probably gone now," she said with worry in her voice. But Margaret had made up her mind. For the first time in years, she felt excited about something. She felt alive again. She spent the next week planning her trip. She learned basic French words, bought a guidebook, and packed her small blue suitcase. The letter went everywhere with her. She kept it in her purse, close to her heart, like a precious treasure. Paris was bigger and busier than Margaret had imagined. The streets were full of people, cars, and the smell of fresh bread from nearby bakeries. She took a taxi to the address on the letter. Her hands were sweaty, and her heart was beating fast with excitement and fear. The building was old and beautiful, with iron balconies and tall windows. Margaret stood outside for 10 minutes, gathering courage to knock on the door. An elderly Frenchwoman answered. She had kind eyes and spoke broken English. Margaret showed her the letter with shaking hands. The woman's face changed when she saw the letter. "Henri Dubois," she whispered. "I knew him. He lived here many years ago." Margaret's heart jumped. She had found someone who knew Henri. The woman, whose name was Isabel, invited Margaret inside for tea. Isabel told Margaret that Henri had been her neighbor. He was a writer who loved books and spent hours writing letters to someone special. He moved away in 1955, Isabel said sadly. But I think I know where he went. He left an address with me. The next address led Margaret to a small village outside Paris. The train ride took 2 hours through beautiful green countryside and rolling hills. In the village, she found an old man named Claude who remembered Henri well. They had been friends and often talked about books together. "Henri never stopped talking about Marie," Claude said with a smile. She was the love of his life, but the war separated them. Claude explained that Henri had tried to find Marie for many years. He wrote letters and searched everywhere, but never found her again. "Henri died 5 years ago," Claude said gently. "But he left something for Marie, hoping she would somehow find it one day." Margaret felt sad that Henri was gone, but also excited. What had he left behind? Could she help finish his story somehow? Claude led her to a small house where Henri had lived. The new owners were kind and let Margaret look through Henri's old things. In a wooden box, she found dozens of letters addressed to Marie. All were unsent, filled with love, hope, and beautiful memories. That evening, Margaret sat in her hotel room reading Henri's letters. Each one told a story of deep love and endless hope. Henri had met Marie during World War II. They fell in love quickly, but the war forced them apart before they could marry. He had searched for her everywhere. He hired people to help, wrote to government offices, and never gave up hope of finding her. The last letter was dated just months before Henri died. In it, he wrote about accepting that he might never see Marie again. "But love never dies," he wrote. "Somewhere, somehow, our love continues. Maybe someone will find these letters and understand what we had." Margaret wiped tears from her eyes. She felt like Henri was speaking directly to her through his words and his endless love. She made another decision that night. She would try to find Marie or her family. Henri's love story deserved an ending. The next morning, she called her daughter Sarah. "I am staying in Paris longer," she said. "I have something important to finish here." Margaret spent the next week visiting libraries, government offices, and elderly people who might remember Marie. She learned that Marie's last name was Moreau. A librarian helped her search old records. They found that Marie Moreau had lived in Lyon after the war and had gotten married. Margaret took another train, this time to Lyon. The city was beautiful, with rivers and old bridges that made her think of romance. At the city hall, she found records showing that Marie had lived there until 1980. Then the trail went cold again. But Margaret didn't give up. She visited nursing homes, talked to older residents, and showed them Marie's name and Henri's letters. At the 5th nursing home, a nurse recognized the name. "Marie Moreau," she said thoughtfully. "She died here 3 years ago." Margaret felt disappointed but also determined. "Did she have any family?" she asked hopefully, her heart still beating with excitement. The nurse smiled. "Yes, she had a granddaughter named Sophie. She visits other residents here sometimes." She's very kind." Sophie was 35 years old and worked as a teacher. When Margaret called her, she was curious about why someone wanted to talk about her grandmother. They met at a small cafe in Lyon. Sophie had her grandmother's kind eyes and gentle smile. She listened carefully as Margaret told Henri's story. "My grandmother never married for love," Sophie said quietly. "She married for security after the war, but she always seemed sad about something." Margaret handed Sophie one of Henri's letters. As Sophie read it, her eyes filled with tears. "She talked about someone named Henri sometimes. She kept a small box of things from the war," Sophie continued. "I never looked inside, but maybe now I should." The next day, Sophie brought the box to Margaret's hotel. Inside were photos, old tickets, and letters. At the bottom was an envelope marked Henri. Sophie opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a letter Marie had written but never sent, just like Henri's letters. "My dearest Henri," it began, "I have searched for you everywhere. I hope you are safe and happy wherever you are." Margaret and Sophie spent hours reading the letters together. Henri and Marie had both spent their lives looking for each other, never knowing how close they came. "They both lived with hope," Sophie said through her tears. "They never stopped believing they would find each other again." Margaret felt a deep sadness for the lost love, but also something else. She felt grateful to be part of bringing their story together. Sophie wanted to visit Henri's grave in the village outside Paris. Margaret agreed to go with her, carrying both sets of letters. At the cemetery, they found Henri's grave under a small oak tree. Sophie placed Marie's letters next to the headstone with fresh flowers. "They're together now," Sophie whispered. Their love finally found its way home. Margaret stood there thinking about her own life. She had been living safely, but not really living at all since her husband died. This journey had shown her that love and adventure were still possible, even at 72. She felt young again, alive again. On the plane back home, Margaret thought about everything that had happened. She had started looking for Henri and Marie, but had found herself instead. She had remembered what it felt like to be excited, to take chances, and to believe in love stories and happy endings. Her daughter Sarah was waiting at the airport. "Mom, you look different," she said with surprise. "You look happy," Margaret smiled. "I am happy. I remembered who I used to be before I became afraid of everything." She told Sarah about her adventure, about Henri and Marie, and about the love that had waited 70 years to be completed. "I want to write their story," Margaret said. "I want people to know that love never really dies, it just waits." Back home, Margaret started writing every day. She wrote about Paris, about love, and about the courage to follow your heart. She also started living differently. She took cooking classes, joined a book club, and made new friends who shared her love of adventure. 6 months later, Margaret published a small book about Henri and Marie's love story. It became popular with people who believed in romance and hope. Sophie visited Margaret that summer. They had become close friends, connected by the love story they had helped complete together. "You know," Sophie said, "I think Henri and Marie brought us together for a reason. They wanted their love to create more love." Margaret agreed. She had learned that love stories never really end, they just find new ways to continue through other people. The old book where she found the letter sits on her shelf now. Sometimes she opens it and remembers the day everything changed. She still has Henri's letters, but now she also has something else. She has the knowledge that it's never too late to start a new adventure. Margaret is 73 now, but she feels 30 again. She travels, writes, and believes in the power of love to change everything. And sometimes on rainy Tuesday afternoons, she thinks about how a single letter can change a life forever. That's the power of love and the magic of never giving up hope. Thank you for listening to The Last Letter from Paris. Remember, your own adventure might be just one discovery away. Until next time, keep believing in love stories.